Welcome back, my family. Before we jump into today's horror stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Your comments and likes really help YouTube push our video and show you even more stories. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and suggestions in the comments, and who knows, I might give you a shout out in the next video. Thank you for being here and for all your amazing support. Working nights in the ICU is different from any other shift. The day team sees the families, the procedures, the rounds, the bustling doctors. But at night, when the hallways fall quiet and only the machines speak, it feels like the whole building belongs to you. It's a place of shadows and hums. Monitors ticking, vents sighing, pumps clicking. I worked night shifts for years, and I thought I had seen everything. I was wrong. It started with a patient named Mr. Henley. He was admitted after a massive stroke, one of the worst bleeds I'd seen on a CT scan. By the time I got him in bed 9, the neurologist said he was non-responsive. His eyes were glazed, his hands limp, his body lying still except for the rise and fall of his chest. On paper, he was little more than a heartbeat in a breathing tube. I treated him like all my patients. I spoke softly while checking vitals, explained what I was doing when I repositioned him, even though he gave no sign of hearing me. Most nights with patients like him were long stretches of silence. But this night would not be silent. Around 2 a.m., I was charting outside his room when I heard it, a man's voice, rough and low, like gravel shifting under tires. It made my skin prickle because I knew there were no visitors allowed, and the TV was off. I slid open the glass door. 5, the voice whispered. Room 5. 30 minutes. I froze. Mr. Henley's lips were moving. His eyes still stared blankly, unfocused, but the words were clear. Room 5 housed a septic patient who'd been teetering all night. I checked her vitals. They looked stable, low blood pressure, but nothing unusual for her condition. Still, his words gnawed at me. I paged the resident for labs early, checked her 4 lines, and tightened my monitoring. Exactly 28 minutes later, alarms shrieked. She vomited against the ventilator tube, aspirated, and her heart rate spiked. We rushed in, suctioned, bagged, restarted meds. She nearly coded, but we saved her. When it was over, my hands still shaking, I looked across the hall at bed 9. Mr. Henley hadn't moved, but I swear his lips curved, just a fraction, like a man who already knew the ending. The next night, the whispers returned. This time, 6 minutes. Box near sink. Fire. I checked around. In bed 12, a cardboard supply box sat under the sharps container by the sink. I didn't smell smoke. Nothing was burning. Still, I moved the box away and secured the sharps container. 6 minutes later, a respiratory tech bumped the wall with a portable cautery unit. If the sharps had fallen into that box of alcohol wipes and plastic, it could have sparked. Coincidence? Maybe, but the timing was exact, and that was harder to ignore. Over the next few nights, his predictions kept coming. 14, elevator, oxygen. Minutes later, a transport elevator jammed while carrying bed 14's patient on a nearly empty oxygen tank. They pried the doors open just before it ran out. Pump 7 stop. I pulled a pump from service that looked fine but had a crack in the backplate. Biomed later said it would have failed and flooded a patient with meds. Stairs. Fall. I sprinted toward the stairwell and caught a coworker slipping on a wet step just before she tumbled head first. 16 times he spoke. 16 times he was right, except once. He whispered flood, dialysis now. We checked. Everything looked fine. Nothing happened. That was the only miss. I tried speaking to him one quiet night. Mr. Henley, how do you know these things? For a long time, there was nothing but the steady hiss of a ventilator down the hall. Then, in that rasping whisper, night thin, Thin, I repeated. He breathed out slowly. Between things. It wasn't an answer that belonged in a chart, but it matched how the ICU feels at 3 a.m. Like reality is stretched tight, and something beyond is just on the other side. Later, I learned from his daughter that he'd been a county emergency planner, the kind of man who mapped out storm paths and evacuation routes. Maybe, even after the stroke destroyed his body, some part of him was still scanning the horizon for danger. On the 9th night, I sat by his bed with my notebook open. His skin was pale and waxy, and his blood pressure sagged lower despite meds. I wondered if he had another warning in him. At 3:17 a.m., his lips moved. I leaned close. "Not tonight," he said. His voice was clearer than before, like all his strength went into those two words. "Not tonight what?" I asked. His eyes didn't track, but the corners of his mouth lifted in the faintest smile. "Me. I go." And then he did. His breathing slowed, his heart faltered, and within minutes he was gone. We coded him because protocol demanded it, but I knew before we started that it was useless. His daughter came in soon after, tears wetting her blue sweater. She kissed his forehead and whispered. He always knew when the storm was coming. I never told her what he'd said to me. I didn't know how. I still keep the notebook. 17 predictions written in shaky pen. 16 came true. One never did, or maybe it hasn't yet. People sometimes ask if the ICU is haunted. I usually smile and say no. But the truth is, sometimes around 3 a.m., when the building hums and the halls go silent, I half expect to hear that gravelly whisper again. I listen harder, not for ghosts, but for warnings we might miss. Because if Mr. Henley taught me anything, it's this: the night is thin. And in that thinness, some people can see storms before they arrive. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories, but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. I took the night shift at Meridian Corporate Center because nobody else wanted it. The pay was a little higher, and the corridors were quiet. Most nights were screens, coffee, and the hum of air vents. I liked the silence. I liked the idea that if something went wrong, I would be the first to know and the first to fix it. The building is a glass box by day and a mirror by night. 12 floors, a lobby with a waterfall wall and fake bamboo. For elevators that talk in softings. A cafeteria that smells like coffee even when it's closed. And a sea of offices with the names of companies etched on glass. Biotech, finance, a few startups with names that sound like vitamins. My first week, I walked the rounds with the day's supervisor. He pointed out doors that stick, cameras that lag, and the one stairwell on the west side that sometimes sets off the motion sensor for no reason. Settling, he said, or mice. He also mentioned the last night guard, Rick. Good guy, he said. Left quick. Emergency family thing. He looked away when he said it. I caught the reflex and filed it away. On the night this really began, I was on hour 4 of my shift. Around 2:10 a.m., camera 12 in the sub-basement flickered. It's the angle that shows the laundry room and the access door to the mechanical crawl space. The space between walls where the ducts run like metal veins. The picture smeared, then sharpened. For 1 second, I saw a shadow cross the frame where no one should be. I leaned closer, rewound. There was again, a shape where there should only be concrete and pipe. I grabbed my keys and took the service elevator down. The sub-basement is colder than the rest of the building. It always smells faintly like bleach and wet cardboard. Water lines ticked. Far down the corridor, the red exit, light buzzed like a sleepy fly. When I pushed into the laundry room, the machines crouched in a metal line, their doors like portholes. The camera above the door blinked its little green light at me, innocent as a houseplant. The access panel to the mechanical crawl space sits behind a rolling cart of detergent. The cart was askew. One was sitting in a tiny puddle of soap water and dirt. That was new. I slid the cart back and shined my flashlight at the panel. For screws held it in place. The bottom left screw had scratches around the head, fresh ones, bright silver arcs. My pulse tapped faster. I put my ear to the metal. I could hear the building's breath through the ducts, but behind that, something else, maybe a thump, maybe nothing, maybe my own blood moving. I backed off. I was alone, and I was not going to open an unknown space with no backup. I did what I was paid to do. I checked the rest of the floor. I made a note in the log. I went back to the cameras and watched the hallway until my eyes burned. That week, little things kept catching my attention. The cafeteria refrigerator was opened and closed between 3 o'clock and 3:10 a.m., but the cleaning crew had clocked out at 1:45. In the mailroom, 3 envelopes had been slid along the top in a careful line, then taped back. In one of the empty floors, the desk chairs were all turned slightly toward the windows, which only happens when people actually sit in them. And in the bathroom on the 9th floor, a roll of paper towels had been stuffed into the ceiling tile to hold it up at a bent angle. Almost like someone had needed anchoring for something. I started leaving coins in odd places. A quarter behind a fire extinguisher, a dime on a paper towel dispenser, a nickel in a plant pot. Most stayed. One disappeared, the one in the plant pot. With the small evidence stacking up, I decided to take one careful step. During my next break, I reached out to the last person who might understand the building after hours, Rick. I found his number in the staff group text and sent a message. Hey, it's Alex, New Night Shift. You around? Any tips for sub-basement? No reply. I tried again the following night. Weird activity around camera 12. Did you ever see anything? Still nothing. The next night, camera 12 flickered again. Same shadow, same wrong shape. I took my flashlight, a small multi-tool, and a can of pepper spray I wasn't supposed to need. Back in the laundry room, I moved the cart and crouched by the panel. I listened. Quiet. I put the multi-tool on the bottom left screw. It turned too easily, like it had been loosened and hand-tightened again. I removed all 4 screws and put them in my pocket. I pulled the panel. Cold air rushed, thin and metallic. The opening was small, just big enough to wriggle through. My light sprayed over ribbed ductwork, cables neatly tied, dust soft like gray snow. 10 feet in, the space turned left. It was tighter there, the kind of tight that presses on your ribs when you inhale. I don't do well with tight spaces. I almost closed it back up. Then my light caught something that didn't belong. A scuff of dark rubber on the duck's metal skin. Footprint height. The kind made by a heel bracing during a turn. My body went cold and hot at the same time. I took a long breath. Crawled. After the turn, the passage opened enough to kneel. There were signs of passage everywhere once I tuned my eyes. Smears on the dust where a shoulder had slid by, a small snag of fabric on a metal lip, and, most telling, a line of white thread stuck to a screw head, shaking in the draft like a whisker. I reached a rectangular cutout, hewn into drywall. It had been sliced in a neat line, then screwed back with the same 4-screw pattern as the panel behind me. On the other side, the wall cavity of an office. Through a gap, I could see dim light and a desk. My light flicked over a pair of eyes 5 inches from mine. I jerked back so hard I hit my head on a duct seam. The world rang. When the ringing faded, the eyes were gone. The gap showed nothing but drywall shadow. I froze there for a full minute. My breath made small ghosts in the cold. My hand shook enough that the beam jiggled. I backed out the way I came, put the panel back, and went straight to the building manager's on-call number. It rang to voicemail. I left a message that I needed an extra set of eyes and that there was an issue with the service space. I didn't say more on a recording. No one called back. I didn't sleep the next day. I lay in my studio and watched light crawl the walls. I tried to think through what I'd seen without letting fear turn it into a monster story. A person had been inside the wall. A person had cut access panels. A person had been watching. That night, I came in early. I pulled up access logs. The company floors have badge readers. After 7 p.m., the logs are mostly cleaning crew and late engineers, then dead. But a pattern emerged in the weeks before I started. A badge with the name Vendor, HVAC service, had pinged irregularly around 3 a.m. on multiple floors. The badge number looked valid. The badge owner didn't. I cross-checked with the actual HVAC company roster. No match. I printed the badge number and put it in my pocket. At 2:58 a.m., I made a decision. I drop a note in the lobby with the front desk, on rounds. If I don't check in by 3:45, call 911-inch, and a second note folded twice in my own back pocket. If found, camera 12, crawl space, fake HVAC badge. It felt dramatic. It also felt like a life jacket. I returned to the sub-basement, opened the panel again, and went in. This time I brought a small bundle of zip ties and chalk. I marked arrows on the duct as I moved, so I wouldn't take a wrong turn on the way out. The air was colder, or I was. The building spoke in clanks and sighs. I slid until the first cutout, then moved past it to the next. Through this second slit, I could see a conference room on the biotech floor. A laptop sat open, its camera decked with a piece of electrical tape. An Ethernet cable lay looped on the table, cut at the end. I moved on. The third slit opened to a different kind of space. It was a dark cavity in the outside wall where the glass curtain met the concrete column. Someone had turned it into a nest. There was a flattened sleeping bag on a strip of plywood, a milk crate with food wrappers, a jar with coins, and photos taped to the inside drywall like trophies. Employees eating, employees at their desks, an executive in his office reading a paper labeled Q4 Strategy. Every photo was taken from inside the wall. Every angle was a secret. On the plywood sat 2 phones, both old models, both plugged into power banks. Next to them, a cheap digital camera and a stack of SD cards bound with a rubber band. There was also something else, a laminated ID card with a mugshot and Vendor, HVAC service. The photo was not an HVAC worker. It was a bearded man with eyes that didn't match his smile. My throat tightened. Behind the crate, I found a small notebook. The handwriting was tiny and more careful than I expected. It listed dates, times, and short notes. October 12th, record 11th floor boardroom. November 5th, copy drive, CFO's office. December 1st, Rick saw me. December 3rd, talk to Rick. 12 out of 10, Rick will help. I turned the page. January 20th, Rick nervous. February 2nd, showed Rick photos from his truck. February 15th, Rick owes a favor. March 8th, Rick late. 03 out of 10, had to solve. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my chest burned. I put the notebook down with hands that felt borrowed. I lifted the milk crate and found what I somehow knew would be there. Zippered pouches like the kind used to move money from cash registers. Inside, not money. USB drives. Users' manuals with notes about internal networks. A folded building map with lines drawn through the walls. The exact paths I was crawling. Someone had surveyed the building with a thief's patience. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Close. They came from the duct behind me, not the office side. Whoever it was had learned to move in these narrow spaces. He was practiced. He was coming back to his nest. I killed my light. In the dark, every noise was a blow. The scrape of denim, the dull thud of a knee, the whisper of breath. He reached the T-joint and paused. I couldn't see him, but I could feel the pause like a held note. Then the scrape again, now toward me. I slid my body into a narrow recess by the column, pressed my back to cold concrete, and held the pepper spray like a talisman. The man slipped in. He didn't turn on a light. He knew where everything was by feel. I smelled him before I could make out his shape. Sweat, old smoke, something sour like a coat that had been wet too many times. He dropped into his nest. I heard plastic rustle, the click of the camera body, the soft slap of a phone being set down. He sighed, long and hoarse. In a low voice, almost as if talking to himself, he said, "You picked the wrong building, Rick. Should have kept quiet." The spray was not going to stop a man who knew these guts better than me. I needed something else. I needed noise, movement, authority. I needed the building to wake. My hand found the power strip under the plywood. I yanked it. The nest went dark. A phone chimed in angry tone. He swore and whipped around. His shoulder brushed my knee. My body went rigid. "What the?" he began. I snapped on my light and aimed it at his eyes. He flinched, blinded. I was already moving. I kicked the milk crate, and it rattled across the plywood, dumping SD cards and wrappers into the void. I dove past him into the duct like a swimmer off a block. He grabbed my ankle. My shoe slipped. My sock foot skidded on cold metal, and pain blazed up my shin as it slammed a seam. I twisted, kicked again, connected with bone. He grunted. His hand slipped. I scrambled and slid, the flashlight beam cartwheeling, throwing crazy shadows. Behind me, he came fast. He was quicker in the tight turns, probably smaller than me, and he had rage on his side. He cursed in a hiss, like he had learned not to be loud. At the second elbow, I palmed a zip tie from my pocket and looped it over a duct clamp. It's something an old maintenance guy once showed me. You can make a dirty tripwire if you do it fast. I pulled the tie tight, left the loop like a snare, and kept going. He hit it. The loop snagged his foot, and his knee went hard into a seam. He barked a sound. In the half second that gave me, I slid through the last corner and toward the panel. My chalk arrows glowed faintly where dust didn't stick. I saw the rectangle of darker dark where the panel should be. I shoved it outward with my shoulder and fell into the laundry room in a clatter of metal against tile. I didn't stop. I slammed the panel up, jammed 2 screws in crooked. He hit the panel a second later from the other side. The metal bulged inward, flexing like a drum. My breath ripped like paper. I staggered to my feet and ran. Down the hall, old pipes flashing in my light. I burst into the corridor, hit the elevator call, then changed my mind and took the stairs 2 at a time. At the landing, I stopped long enough to radio the front desk and say one word, "Police." Then I ran up to the lobby. By the time I reached the glass doors, my chest felt like hands were squeezing it. The night air beyond the doors was black and indifferent. I saw my note still sitting where I'd left it. I snatched it. I wanted no loose ends. It took the police 12 minutes to arrive. In those 12 minutes, I replayed his words and my running and the notebooks line. Had to solve. I thought about Rick. About solve. When the officers came in, I gave him the short version and the path to the panel. I gave him the badge number. I gave him the notebook and the SD cards I had managed to grab as I kicked everything over. There were 2 plainclothes investigators with them who didn't look surprised at any of it. "Stay here," one officer said. "Do not go back down there." I didn't argue. They went down. I heard footfalls, radio static, a muffled shout. Then I heard something I wasn't ready for. A door slam above us, on the mezzanine level that overlooks the lobby. The officer at the desk and I both looked up. A figure moved along the dim balcony, fast and low. He had found another exit from the wall world into the building world. Of course he had. "Hey," the officer yelled. The figure vaulted the short railing in one clean movement. For a breath, he hung in space, thin, wiry, a dark hoodie, a beard like shadow. And then he hit the lobby floor in a roll that popped him up on his feet. He sprinted toward the revolving door. I wish I could say I did something brave and smart. I did the thing my body chose. I launched myself sideways into the revolving door and jammed my shoulder into the glass. The door bucked. The man slammed into the opposite panel and bounced back with a snarl. For a heartbeat, we were inches apart, separated by curved glass. His eyes were pale in the lobby lights. They were flat, not wild, not mad, just very, very awake. Then he shoved hard. The door lurched. The officer was there in 2 strides and tackled him low. The glass shuddered. There was an ugly thud. The man writhed, fast and slippery, but 2 more officers hit him, and then there were hands and knees and zip ties, and he was face down on the marble with his cheek pressed to his own breath. He didn't say anything. He stared at the line where the marble slabs met. They took him. They sealed the crawl space and peeled back more panels I hadn't seen. They found a rope ladder in the 9th floor bathroom ceiling tile and scratch marks along a path down to the executive suite. They found caches, cans of food, water bottles, a small camping stove, with care that bordered on love. They found more photos, a few Polaroids, a lot of digital. And they found a pocket spiral notebook with the last pages smeared, as if someone had moved through wet ink. The investigators came back to me after dawn, when the building started to wake and the lobby filled with coffee steam and bright shoes. They asked me to walk them through my week. I told them everything. They asked about Rick. I told them I'd tried to reach him. One of the investigators, she had a face like the edge of a coin, asked if I wanted to sit down before she told me what they knew. I said no. She told me anyway. Rick had been blackmailed. The man in the walls had taken photos of him meeting someone behind the building on a night he wasn't supposed to be there. The someone was a woman who worked on the 8th floor. It wasn't a crime to meet her, but it was a violation of company policy, and he was married, and he was scared. The man offered him a deal: leave certain doors unlocked, look the other way, delete a camera clip or 2. The notebook I found used the phrase favor like it was a normal word. When Rick tried to back out, the man had solved. They found a piece of work glove embedded in a dried smear deep inside the crawl space by camera 12. It matched the man's gloves. They also found Rick's key fob at the bottom of a dark gap between floors where it would never have fallen by itself. They didn't find Rick's body, at least not in the building. He had been missing for months. His truck had been found 2 towns over, near the river. We had all believed the posted flyer and the sad rumor that he needed to be somewhere else. It was tidy. It was acceptable. It was wrong. The man finally spoke late that morning. He said his name was Jordan. He said Meridian wasn't his first building and wouldn't have been his last. He said he had been paid to watch, to copy, to collect. He used the word client the way you use boss if your boss pays in cash and never writes emails. He said nothing about Rick, but he didn't need to. Corporate sent a statement an hour later that said nothing in a lot of words. The biotech company on the 10th floor sent their employees home and called in a private security firm with short hair and awkward smiles. The building manager looked at me like I had lit a fuse and saved him at the same time. When my shift ended, I didn't go home. I sat in the break room with my hands around a paper cup until the coffee went cold. The manager came in and squeezed my shoulder once, awkwardly. "Take a week," he said. "On us." I nodded, but I didn't move. After the arrest, the story unfolded itself like a hard map. The man had been part of a corporate espionage chain. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a patient tool. He watched who stayed late, who printed sensitive documents, who typed passwords too slowly, who set up private meetings that smelled like money. He took photos through vents. He copied drives at night where the glass panel gave him a view of a laptop left in sleep mode. He ate from our fridges and slept in our walls and used our building's breath to keep himself warm. They traced his funds. They found drops and dead drops, burner phones, habits of a man who knows how to disappear. They linked him to another building across town where a competitor had a product launch stolen out from under them. They tied cash to a shell company with a name like a hiking club, Summit Acquisitions. The name meant nothing in the lobby, but the investigators wrote it down like a bell had rung. I took the week. I slept badly. I would lie on my back and feel drafts where there were no drafts, like my walls were thin and full of eyes. I thought about small signs, move coins, turn chairs, cold air, and how easy it is to explain anything if you want to. When I returned, the building was bright and oversecure. New panels replaced the old. They installed tamper sensors on the access covers and added grates over the open ceiling spaces in bathrooms and maintenance rooms. They hired a second night guard for redundancy. They offered to move me to days. I said no. On my first night back, I did my rounds. The laundry room smelled clean. The panel by camera 12 had new screws with orange tamper paint. I put my palm on the metal. It was just a panel now, nothing behind it but air and ducts and quiet. I still leave a quarter in the plant pot. I still check it every night. I don't think it will go missing again, but want to know in case it does. Sometimes, long after midnight, I stand in the lobby where the revolving door curves and look up at the balcony. I picture the moment when his eyes met mine through that arc of glass. I replay that quiet, flat look. It wasn't hate. It wasn't rage. It was attention. It was the gaze of someone who had been watching for months and had made a home in the thin places where most of us never look. We spend our days in the open parts of buildings, the spaces meant for us, the bright rooms with the plants and the prints on the walls. We forget about the dark inches between the drywall and the duct, the highways of wire, the crawl spaces that map the skeleton of a place. But those inches exist. Sometimes someone lives there. When the elevators ding at 3 a.m. and open onto an empty floor, I listen harder than I used to. I hear the building breathe. I hear water move in pipes, air move in vents, and the small creak as duct expands and contracts. It's just a building, I tell myself. And then I think of the notebook's plain line, had to solve, and how another line can end a human life, neat as cutting drywall. I think of Rick and his key fob in the dark gap. I think of the way fear makes cowards of people who were good yesterday and may be good again tomorrow. I still like the silence. It isn't empty to me anymore. It's full of what could be hiding. That isn't comfort, but it's the truth. And truth is better than any alarm. I work nights as a janitor at St. Helena Hospital. People imagine the graveyard shift is boring, just mopping empty halls and cleaning waiting rooms while the world sleeps. That's partly true, but hospitals are alive at night in a way few people ever see. Machines hum, nurses whisper, doors creak that no one touched. And the morgue is never as still as you think. My name is Adonis. I never liked the morgue, but it was part of my job. Every night, I followed the same routine. Start on the first floor, wipe down the cafeteria, mop the lobby, empty trash bins. Then the ICU, where families clung to hope under dim lights. Finally, the basement. That's where the laundry, storage, and morgue sat side by side. The morgue had always unsettled me. The air was colder, and the smell was different. Not rot, but a sharp metallic tang, like old coins left in water. Usually, I just swept around the double doors and moved on. But one night, something was different. It started with a sound. A clink. Not the hum of refrigeration, not a door hinge. A metallic clink like tools. I thought maybe a pathologist was working late, but the schedule taped to the wall said no autopsies that night. Curiosity pulled me closer. I pressed my ear to the morgue door. I heard muffled voices, a man muttering, then a zip sound like a bag being opened. Then silence. I backed away quickly, heart thudding. I told myself maybe I was tired. Maybe it was pipes or my imagination. I didn't go inside. 2 nights later, I came down the same hallway. The morgue lights were on again, though the log sheet showed no activity scheduled. This time the door wasn't shut all the way. It stood open by an inch. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Through the crack, I saw a man in scrubs leaning over a body bag on the steel table. He had surgical gloves on and a tray of instruments beside him, scalpels, clamps, things I couldn't name. He was removing something from the body. Carefully, methodically. It wasn't an autopsy. I'd seen those before, loud saws, long incisions, everything documented. This was secretive, quiet. He placed what looked like a human organ into a cooler. The bag was zipped back up. The body looked untouched. I pulled away so fast I knocked over my mop bucket. Water spilled across the floor with a loud splash. The sound echoed. The man froze. His head snapped toward the door. For a second, I was sure he saw me. But after a tense pause, he turned back, cleaned his tools, and carried the cooler out through a side door. I stayed frozen until the lights went out again. I couldn't sleep that morning. My brain kept replaying what I'd seen. The man had taken something from a body meant for cremation. The next night, I checked the schedule. 3 bodies were listed for transport to the crematorium at dawn. By 4 a.m., 2 bags were gone. I asked a nurse casually, "Hey, do they always move bodies that early?" She frowned. "No, usually after sunrise." That was the moment I knew. Something illegal was happening in our morgue. Over the next week, I watched more carefully. Always around 2 or 3 a.m., the morgue lights would flick on. Men I didn't recognize. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2 would slip inside. They wore hospital scrubs, but no badges. They never spoke loudly. They always left with coolers. I started noticing other details too. Some of the dead patients hadn't been that critical when I'd last seen them alive. One elderly man had been laughing with his grandson in the ICU. 2 days later, his name appeared on the morgue list, tagged natural causes. Another patient coded suddenly during dialysis, though nurses whispered he'd been stable. Something wasn't right. I knew I couldn't just tell anyone. Who would believe a janitor claiming doctors were stealing organs? I needed proof. One night, I brought my old phone and set it to record. I propped it against a supply cart facing the morgue doors. Hours later, I retrieved it. When I replayed the footage, my stomach dropped. The video showed 2 men wheeling a body into the morgue, though no transport was logged for that hour. 15 minutes later, they walked out with a cooler. Their faces were clear enough to recognize, not pathologists, not staff I'd ever seen. I recorded 3 more nights. Same routine. Bodies in, coolers out. Then I made a mistake. I went inside. It was after 3 a.m. The lights were off, the room quiet. I slipped through the door and shut it gently. The cold air stung my lungs. On the main table lay a zip body bag. The cooler was still on the counter, half-packed. I couldn't resist. I pulled the zipper down a few inches. Inside lay a man, maybe 40, with fresh sutures across his chest. Not Y-shaped like an autopsy, but small, neat cuts. His skin still had warmth. His lips were slightly parted. I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been dead long. Then I heard footsteps. Panic surged. I ducked behind a metal shelf just as the door creaked open. The 2 men entered, laughing softly. He coded faster than expected. One said, "Less mess this time." "Fresh is always better," the other replied. He snapped on gloves and unzipped the bag fully. I covered my mouth with both hands to keep from making a sound. They worked quickly, removing what they needed, packing it into the cooler. When they were done, one said, "Client's paying double. Worth the risk." They left, not even noticing the phone I'd hidden earlier under the supply cart. The next morning, I couldn't keep quiet. I called the FBI tip line. I didn't know if they'd take me seriously, but when I mentioned video evidence of organ theft, they asked to meet immediately. I handed over my recordings. The agent's expression turned grim as he scrolled through them. "This matches an active investigation," he said. "You did the right thing." For weeks, nothing happened. I thought maybe they'd forgotten me. Then, one night, the morgue stayed dark. No footsteps, no coolers. 2 days later, the news broke. Federal agents had arrested several doctors and middlemen across 3 states. They'd been running an illegal organ harvesting network, selling on the black market. St. Helena's morgue had been one of their collection points. One of the men in my videos was a surgeon I'd seen once or twice in the cafeteria. Another was a technician with falsified credentials. The network stretched farther than I'd imagined. Multiple hospitals, transport drivers, even a crematorium worker paid to look the other way. They found evidence some patients had been deliberately overdosed or pulled from life support earlier than necessary, just to harvest fresh organs. The thought made me sick. The hospital tried to bury the scandal, but you can't bury something that ugly. Families sued. Staff quit. For months, the halls buzzed with fear and whispers. The morgue was closed and renovated under heavy security. As for me, people started calling me a hero, the janitor who cracked the case. But I don't feel like one. When I close my eyes at night, I still see the man on the table, chest sutured, lips parted like he might still be breathing. I still hear the thieves laughing as they worked. And every time I push my mop bucket past the morgue doors, I swear the air smells sharper, colder, as if the walls themselves remember what happened there. I've worked the night desk at the Pine Valley Motor Lodge for almost 6 years. It's not a glamorous job. The motel sits right off the interstate, 20 rooms in a U-shape around a cracked parking lot. At night, the neon sign buzzes like a trapped insect, and the ice machine rattles loud enough to cover most conversations. People think working night shift at a motel is boring, checking in truckers, printing receipts, telling teenagers to keep the noise down. And most nights, that's true. But boredom is safer than what I found in room 18. You checked in on a Monday. Paid cash. No credit card on file, which was unusual but not unheard of. Some people don't want a paper trail. He gave the name Mr. Clark, though I doubted it was real. He was in his mid-40s, wiry, with a stare that felt like it was searching for exits instead of looking at me. One night, he said, but he stayed and stayed. Every day, he paid for another night. Every night, he kept the curtains drawn tight. The first week, nothing stood out. Then I started noticing things. He always came to the desk alone, but when I passed his room during my rounds, I thought I heard muffled voices, too many for one man. Sometimes a child's voice. When housekeeping knocked, he refused service. "I'll take care of it," he'd say through the door. The trash piled up, and I had to log complaints. But he always paid on time, so management told me not to push. Still, unease crept in. Something about room 18 felt wrong. One night around 2 a.m., I went outside to smoke. The air was damp, the lot quiet. That's when I noticed the curtain in room 18 shift. Just a sliver, but enough. A pale face peeked through the gap. Not the man's face, a young woman's. Her eyes darted toward me, wide and frantic, then vanished as the curtain was yanked shut from behind. I dropped my cigarette. My stomach knotted. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was a girlfriend, maybe they wanted privacy. But when I checked the registry, no one else was listed under that room. Just Clark. I kept watching. More little things piled up. A delivery driver left fast food bags at his door, knocked, and walked away. When I picked up trash the next day, I saw 6 empty soda cups, 2 kid-sized. Once, when the door opened slightly, I saw shadows move inside. Several people, not one. A guest in room 19 complained of crying through the wall. I mentioned it to my manager. He shrugged. He pays cash. Don't poke the bear. Cops bring more trouble than they solve. That didn't sit right with me. On my 4th week of watching, Clark came to the desk to ask about extending another night. While he spoke, I glanced down and saw the keycard in his hand. It wasn't one of ours. It was a cheap knockoff, the kind you can buy online. That meant he duplicated it, probably so others could come and go without checking in. Later that night, when I passed room 18 on patrol, I noticed something taped over the peephole from the inside. A strip of black electrical tape. I felt cold all over. It was a Friday, and the lot was fuller than usual. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a short, sharp scream from room 18. It cut off so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. Then came a thud, like someone hitting the floor. I grabbed my master key card, but when I reached the door, my hand shook too much to slide it in. I knocked. Front desk. Everything okay? Silence. Then Clark's voice, calm and firm. Just a movie. Sorry. The TV volume clicked on loud enough to shake the wall. I stood there another minute, heart hammering, before I forced myself to walk away. But I knew this wasn't just a weird guest. Something darker was happening. I decided to act. If management wouldn't, I would. I set my phone to record video and propped it on the cleaning cart in the hallway, angled at room 18's door. For 2 hours, nothing. Then, around 4:30, the door opened. Clark stepped out with another man I'd never seen before. Thick jacket, baseball cap low. They spoke in hushed voices, then carried a small girl between them. Her head slumped against her shoulder as if she were drugged or too exhausted to move. My throat went dry. I watched them guide her to a waiting van, load her in, and drive off. When I retrieved the phone, my hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. The video was grainy, but the girl's face was clear enough. I didn't dial 911 right away. Fear froze me. Fear of being wrong, fear of Clark coming back, and realizing I'd seen too much. But by dawn, I couldn't live with silence. I called the police. I told them everything. The voices, the faces, the taped peephole, the scream, the video. They didn't laugh. They asked me to send the footage and stay quiet until detectives arrived. That night, unmarked cars rolled into the lot. Officers in plain clothes took positions near room 18. My chest felt tight as I watched on the desk. At 2:15 a.m., Clark returned with another man. They carried bags into the room. 10 minutes later, the police hit the door. The crash echoed through the whole motel. Shouts followed, hands up, police. I'll never forget what they found. Inside room 18 were 3 women and 1 child. The youngest couldn't have been more than 9. They looked malnourished, eyes wide with fear. Their wrists bore faint marks of restraints. The officers pulled them out gently, wrapped them in blankets, led them to safety. One woman clung to my arm as they passed, whispering thank you over and over, though she didn't even know my name. Clark and his partner were dragged out in handcuffs, shouting, faces twisted in rage. One of them spat on the carpet, eyes blazing when he spotted me at the desk. I'll never forget that look. The police later told me room 18 was part of a trafficking pipeline. Victims were moved along motels like ours, kept hidden until transport. Clark had been doing it for months, maybe years, slipping under the radar because no one looked closely. My video helped tie the case to a larger network. Over a dozen arrests followed across state lines. The motel closed for 2 weeks during the investigation. When it reopened, room 18 was stripped bare. The smell of bleach clung to the air. Guests never knew what had happened there, but I did. Management pretended nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. Working nights, you see the things daylight hides. Drunks, addicts, lonely travelers. But the worst monsters don't stumble or shout. They smile, pay cash, and keep the curtains shut. Sometimes I walk past room 18 and feel the urge to stop, to listen, to make sure no one else is inside. Even though it's empty now, the memory lingers like smoke. I remind myself of the girl's face when they carried her out. She looked dazed but alive. She had a chance at a future because I listened, because I refused to ignore the wrongness. People call me brave, but the truth is, I was terrified every second. I still am. When headlights sweep across the lot late at night, I tense. When a man checks in with cash and no luggage, my stomach knots. But fear is better than silence. Because silence is what lets monsters live in places like Room 18. I never thought a machine could talk. Not in words, anyway. But the night Machine 7 started weaving warnings into fabric, my life at the textile factory changed forever. I've worked at Patterson Textiles for 12 years. It's loud, dirty work, but steady. The factory floor smells of oil and lit. Rows of looms rattle like bones in a tin can. Night shift is quieter. Half the machines shut down, fewer supervisors around. I was assigned to Machine 7, an older loom that had been repaired so many times it rattled differently than the others. The guys joked it was cursed. Machine 7 eats more fingers than any other, one said. I laughed it off, but then came the night it started spelling. It was close to 3 a.m. The floor was almost empty except for me and a mechanic tightening bolts 2 rows over. I watched the shuttle move back and forth, laying thread in neat lines. Then I noticed something odd. The pattern on the fabric wasn't just random defects. It spelled letters. Clear as day. Stop for. I stared at it. Machines jam. Sure, but they don't make words. I thought I was imagining things. I cut the section out and shoved it in my pocket. 10 minutes later, a scream split the air. Machine 4, 2 rows down, had snapped a belt. The broken strap whipped across the operator's face, slicing his cheek wide open. He survived, but blood sprayed the fabric like ink. I pulled out the scrap I'd saved. Stop for. The next night, I went in jittery. My eyes kept flicking to Machine 7's cloth. At first, it wove normally. Then, around 2 a.m., letters emerged again, fall ladder. I had no idea what it meant. 30 minutes later, a maintenance worker slipped off a ladder while changing a light bulb. He broke his wrist. I started saving every scrap of cloth that carried a message. Some are short, some longer. They weren't perfect. Sometimes letters leaned or skipped, but the meaning was clear. Heart 12. 20 minutes later, a worker in section 12 collapsed with a heart attack. Burn hand. An operator reached 2, close to a hot press, and screamed. Door fire exit. 2 nights later, a spark from wiring ignited rags piled near that very door. The messages always came before the accidents. I couldn't keep it to myself. I told Marco, an older worker who'd been at Patterson longer than anyone. He didn't laugh. Instead, his face went pale. You don't know the story? He asked. What story? Machine 7's where Daniel Smith died. Back in 2011. Belt snapped, pulled him in before anyone could hit the kill switch. Tore him up bad. They shut the line for a week, but the bosses made us go back. Folks say his spirit never left. You think it's him warning us? I swallowed hard. I remembered hearing about Daniel when I first got hired, but nobody talked about it much. A death like that casts a long shadow. After that, I couldn't look at the machine the same way. Every vibration, every click sounded like breathing. One night, I decided to gather proof. I set up my phone to record the loom. Hours later, I played it back. Clear as anything, the machine wove the words, "Watch exit," across the fabric. That same shift, a drunk ex-employee tried sneaking in through the side exit. Security caught him carrying a knife. I showed the video to Marco. He crossed himself. It's Daniel. It has to be. The strangest part came later, when the warnings weren't just about the factory anymore. One scrap spelled Crash Truck 41. That night, a delivery truck, number 41 on the roster, jackknifed it on the highway. The driver survived, but barely. Another message said, "Home, fire Kelly." Kelly was a co-worker on my shift. I showed her the cloth, embarrassed like I'd gone crazy. She laughed nervously until her apartment caught fire 2 days later. An electrical short. She escaped with her kids, but the place was destroyed. Word spread among the workers. Some mocked me, but others begged to see the cloths. A few even asked me to watch for their names. I hated the attention, but I couldn't stop the machine from spelling. It chose what to say, not me. It was late one stormy night when Machine 7 wove its longest message yet. I leaned close, hardly breathing as the letters appeared. Caden bleed out 3. My own name. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would split my ribs. I tore the fabric off, shoved it in my pocket, and shut the machine down. I didn't care if the supervisor yelled. I couldn't unsee it. All shift long, I jumped at every sound. I avoided Machine 3 completely. I wore gloves, goggles, ear protection, anything I could. At 4 a.m., while I was sweeping near the loading dock, a crate slipped from a forklift. It tipped toward me, sharp corner aimed at my chest. I dove aside, but the edge sliced across my arm deep enough to hit muscle. Blood poured down my sleeve. I staggered back, clutching the wound. The words on the cloth echoed in my head, Caden bleed out. I didn't die, but I came close. If the medic hadn't tied a tourniquet, maybe I would have. When I came back to work weeks later, my arm still stiff, Machine 7 sat silent. Management had finally ordered it decommissioned. Too many breakdowns, too many accidents. They hauled it away for scrap. Some workers cheered. I felt hollow. 4 nights afterward, I dreamed of threads spelling warnings in the dark. I'd wake in a sweat, my arm throbbing. Sometimes I swore I heard the faint clatter of a shuttle moving, even in my empty apartment. One morning, Marco handed me a folded piece of cloth. They missed this when they scrapped it, he said. I opened it. The letters were crooked, but clear. Done. I don't know if it meant the machine was done warning us or if Daniel's spirit had finally moved on. Working in that factory taught me one truth. Machines remember. Every dent, every drop of blood, every scream gets caught in their gears. Some memories are louder than others. I still have the scraps in a box under my bed. 16 pieces of fabric, each one tied to an accident or disaster. Proof that something or someone was watching through the rattle of Machine 7. Sometimes I wonder if destroying the machine silenced Daniel forever, or if he's still out there trying to warn someone else through some other piece of steel and thread. When I hear the hum of a sewing machine or the click of a typewriter, my skin crawls, because I know machines can talk. And sometimes they don't just talk, they scream. Working at a 24-hour gas station off a lonely highway isn't anyone's dream job. But I needed money for school, and the night shift paid better. The place was small, 4 pumps, a flickering neon sign, and a convenience store that smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. Nights were usually empty. A few truckers stopping for fuel, a couple drunks staggering in for chips. After midnight, the road outside was black, as if the world ended beyond the pumps. That's when Earl would show up. He came in 3 times a week, always at 3:17 a.m. sharp. Not 3:16, not 3:18, exactly 3:17. I thought my clock was broken the first few times, but no, the man was punctual like a ghost of a train schedule. He was tall, wiry, maybe in his 50s, with weathered skin and a baseball cap pulled low. He always wore the same faded jacket and boots dusted with gravel. He'd nod at me, polite but quiet, then buy the same things: black coffee, a pack of Camels, sometimes beef jerky. Cash only. Evening, he'd mutter. Evening, I'd reply, even though it was technically morning. Then he'd head out, climb into a beat-up blue Ford pickup, and drive off into the dark. Nothing strange at first, just a regular night customer. But after a month, I started noticing things. For one, I never saw him fuel up. He parked by the pumps, but never lifted the nozzle. Just came in, bought his things, and left. For another, the truck had no plates. I didn't notice at first, but once I did, I checked every time. The plate frame was there, but it was empty, like it had been scrubbed clean. And then there was the smell, not of smoke or coffee, but a faint odor of burned rubber and gasoline that clung to him, sharp enough to sting the nose. I mentioned him to my coworker, Daryl, who worked day shift. "You mean Earl?" he said casually. "Yeah, Earl. Who is he?" Daryl's face shifted, uncertain. "Funny. You wouldn't know. Earl died last year. Car crash just down the highway." I laughed. "No, he didn't. He comes in all the time." But Daryl didn't laugh back. "He's dead. Died in a blue Ford. Burned alive when the tank ruptured." I went to the funeral. My stomach tightened. I wanted to dismiss it as a joke, but the smell of gasoline on Earl's jacket came rushing back to me. The next night, at 3:17, Earl walked in like always. My hands trembled as I rang up his coffee. "Evening," he said. I forced a smile. "Evening, Earl." He froze just for a second. He'd never told me his name. Slowly, his pale eyes lifted to mine. "Who told you?" The air felt thick. I swallowed hard. "A co-worker. Said you passed." His jaw worked like he was chewing words before spitting them. "Can't pass. Not yet." I didn't know what to say. He picked up his coffee and cigarettes, nodded once, and left. My pulse hammered until the taillights vanished. I couldn't let it go. The next day, I searched online. Sure enough, I found it. A news article from 6 months earlier. Local man killed in fiery crash. The photo showed the same man who'd stood at my counter. Cap, jacket, everything. His name, Earl Jennings. The article said he'd been driving home late from work when a drunk driver clipped his truck. The Ford flipped, caught fire, and exploded. Earl died before paramedics arrived, survived by his estranged wife and a daughter in college. My blood went cold. The next time he came in, I gathered my courage. "Earl," I whispered, "you know you're gone, right?" His eyes were heavy with something between anger and sorrow. "I know," he muttered, "but I can't move on. Oh, too much. Left things unfinished." "What kind of things?" I asked. He looked at me, then really looked, as if deciding if I could be trusted. "Debts. Money I never paid back. Family I left behind. I can't rest until it's fixed." I don't know why, but I felt a pull to help him. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was fear. Maybe both. So I asked for details. He gave me names, addresses, amounts of money he'd borrowed but never returned, a daughter he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "I just need peace," he said quietly. "Then I can go." Over the next week, I did what he asked. I mailed cash to the people he'd owed, slipping notes in envelopes, paid in full from Earl. I visited his daughter's campus, trembling, and handed her a letter Earl had dictated to me, written in my messy handwriting. She cried when she read it. She didn't know me, but she whispered, "Thank you." Each time I completed a task, Earl's visits grew lighter, his steps less heavy, his face less shadowed. Until one night, he didn't buy anything. He just stood at the counter, hands empty. "Almost done," he said. "One more thing." "What is it?" "Tell my wife." "I'm sorry." I drove out to the address he gave me, a small white house on the edge of town. His wife opened the door, tired-eyed, clutching a cardigan around her shoulders. I stammered, "I work at the gas station." "Earl, my voice cracked. "He wanted me to tell you he's sorry." Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. She nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting years to hear it. She whispered, "I know," then closed the door gently. That night, at 3:17, I waited. The clock ticked. The neon buzzed. But Earl never came. Weeks passed, and I never saw him again. Room felt emptier without his visits. Sometimes I still expect the door to jingle at 3:17, but it stays silent. I drive past the spot where his crash happened. There's a faint black scar on the asphalt and flowers tied to a post. I pull over sometimes and leave a cigarette even though I don't smoke. Working the night shift is still lonely, but quieter now. Safer, because I know we'll finally moved on. But every time headlights sweep into the lot at 3:17, my stomach knots. I half expect that blue Ford to roll up again, smelling of gasoline and carrying a man who just needed peace. Working nights at a freight warehouse is dull but steady. I drive a forklift, move pallets, and scan boxes. The air smells like dust and diesel, and the only sounds are engines humming and crates thudding. It's honest work, or at least I thought it was. My name's Timothy, and I'll never look at a cardboard box the same way again. Our warehouse processed shipments for dozens of companies. Furniture, electronics, clothing, you name it, it passed through. Most of the job was scanning barcodes, loading trucks, and moving on. The shipments from one company, though, always fell off. Summit Acquisitions. Plain brown boxes, no logos, just a black and white label with numbers that didn't match our usual codes. They came twice a week, always after midnight, always with strict instructions. Do not open. Transfer only. I never thought much about it until the night one of the boxes split. I was moving a pallet of Summit crates when one toppled. The tape ripped, spilling contents onto the floor. Not electronics, not clothes, a leather purse, a pair of women's shoes, a child's backpack with stickers peeling off. I froze. These weren't goods, they were personal belongings. I picked up the purse. Inside was a driver's license, photos of a smiling family, credit cards. All still there. The name was familiar. I'd seen on the news weeks earlier. A woman missing from a neighboring state. My stomach dropped. I shoved the items back into the box, taped it shut, and loaded it onto the truck like nothing happened. But inside, panic churned. After that, I paid closer attention. More Summit shipments came. I pretended to scan while sneaking glimpses inside. Every time, the contents were personal. Wallets, jewelry, phones with cracked screens, clothes folded neatly like from a closet. They weren't shipments, they were evidence. Whispers in the break room confirmed my fear. Summit's shady, one guy muttered. Boxes too heavy for what they're marked as. Another swore he'd seen dried blood on the edge of a crate. I wanted to believe it was just stolen property being moved around. But deep down I knew it was worse. One night, curiosity won. I pried open a Summit box behind a stack of pallets, hidden from cameras. Inside was a shoebox. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of photographs. Smiling faces, family portraits, vacation shots. All torn, smeared with something dark. At the bottom of the shoebox, taped shut, was a plastic bag. I peeled it open and gagged. Inside was a lock of hair, still tangled with blood. I slammed the lid back on, my hands shaking. My skin crawled like bugs were under it. That's when I saw the shipment log taped to the side. Dates, locations, numbers. I realized with horror what it meant. These weren't random belongings. They were cleanup shipments. Summit was moving evidence from crime scenes. I couldn't stay silent. I searched the missing persons database online. Item after item from the boxes matched names on the lists. A phone case with a unicorn sticker. A necklace described in a police report. Even the driver's license I'd seen earlier belonged to a woman still listed as missing. Summit Acquisitions wasn't a real shipping company. It was a front, and our warehouse was helping them dispose of murder evidence. I debated what to do. Tell my boss? No way. He signed off on every shipment. Call the cops? Without proof, they'd laugh me off, or worse, Summit would find out. So I began documenting. Quietly. Every time a Summit shipment arrived, I snapped photos on my phone, labels, contents, logs. I saved scraps of packaging in my locker. I even wrote down serial numbers. Each night, I felt eyes on me. Forklift engines hummed, radios crackled, but I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching. It all came to a head when my supervisor, Mr. Grady, caught me near a Summit pallet with my phone out. "You don't open those boxes," he said sharply, his voice lower than usual. I forced a laugh, just scanning. His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. "Forget what you saw. Summit pays good money. You like your paycheck, right?" My throat went dry. He knew I knew. I nodded quickly, pocketed my phone, and walked away. But my decision was made. The next day, I skipped sleep and drove straight to the FBI field office downtown. My hand shook as I handed over my photos and notes. The agent flipped through them silently, his face hardening. Finally, he said, "This matches an active investigation. You've done the right thing. Don't tell anyone you came here." Relief flooded me, but fear too. If Summit found out, I was finished. For weeks, nothing happened. Summit shipments kept coming. Grady kept glaring. I thought maybe the FBI had shelved it. Then one night, everything exploded. Unmarked vans pulled into the lot. Agents in vests swarmed the warehouse. "FBI, step away from the pallets." Chaos erupted. Workers froze. Grady bolted, only to be tackled near the loading dock. I watched, heart hammering, as agents ripped open Summit boxes. Purses, phones, clothes, even weapons. Evidence from dozens of missing persons cases. The truth was undeniable. Summit was part of a murder-for-hire operation. The belongings of victims had been boxed, shipped, and buried in warehouses like ours to erase the trail. 33 cases were solved with the evidence recovered that night. Families finally got closure, though the details were gruesome. Grady and several higher-ups were indicted as co-conspirators. The Summit network spanned 3 states. The FBI told me my documentation had been the breakthrough. Without it, they'd still be chasing shadows. But being called a whistleblower didn't feel heroic. I still dreamed of those boxes, personal belongings stripped from lives cut short. The smell of cardboard and oil makes me nauseous now. I quit the warehouse, moved 2 towns over, but the memories followed. Working nights in that warehouse taught me something I'll never forget. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it comes in cardboard boxes with neat labels, stacked on pallets like any other freight. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you find inside. It's how ordinary it looks. Now, every time I see a plain brown box, I wonder what's really in there. I've been hosting the graveyard shift at WPLR for 7 years. Midnight to 5 a.m. It's just me, a mic, and the lonely people of the city who can't sleep. Some call to request songs. Some rant about politics. Some just want a voice on the other end of the line. But then there was Mike. It was 12:42 a.m. on a Tuesday when he first called. My producer patched him through. "You're on the air," I said, yawning. A low, steady voice replied. "Hey, Knox. Just wanted to say, you've got a good show. I listen every night." "Appreciate that," I said. "Where you calling from?" He chuckled. "Here and there. I like to walk at night. Quieter." We talked about nothing, weather, city lights, the way night makes the world smaller. Harmless stuff. When he hung up, I barely remembered him. But he called again the next night. And the next. Always around 1 a.m. Always with that calm, measured voice. At first, his stories sounded like rambling observations. "There's a woman waiting at a bus stop," he said one night. Red coat, long braid, tapping her foot. "She's reading the timetable, but no buses are running this late." I chuckled. Sounds like someone missed the last ride. But the next morning, news broke. A woman in a red coat had been found dead near a bus stop 2 miles from the station. Strangled. I told myself it was coincidence. Cities are full of women in red coats. The next week, Mike described a man leaving a bar, stumbling, jingling his keys. He keeps dropping them. He shouldn't be walking alone. The following day, a drunk man's body was pulled from an alley behind that same bar. My gut twisted. I tried brushing it off as eerie luck, but the calls kept coming, more detailed each time. "There's a couple sitting in a parked car," he said once, voice calm as ever. "He's holding her hand. She's nervous. He doesn't see me yet." That was the first time my blood ran cold. "You don't mean you're watching them right now?" I asked. A pause, then a soft chuckle. "You could say that." I ended the call fast. But the next day, the couple was on the news. Found dead in their car, engines still running. That's when I knew Mike wasn't just describing strangers. He was describing victims. The calls became a ritual. Listeners started recognizing him. "It's Mike again," they'd text, half amused, half creeped out. They didn't know. I tried dropping him, but he always got through. He called from different numbers, disposable ones. He wanted to be heard. One night, his voice was softer, almost intimate. "You're the only one I tell, Knox. The only one who listens." "Why me?" I whispered, though I shouldn't have. "Because you'll keep my secrets. And because I like knowing my words go out to the whole city while I work." My hands shook on the console. My listeners thought they were hearing a lonely insomniac. But I knew the truth. They were hearing a killer narrate his crimes. I couldn't just hang up. What if losing that outlet made him lash out worse? So I played along, kept him talking, logged every detail. "What do you see tonight, Mike?" I'd ask, masking my fear with radio host charm. Sometimes he described streets I recognized. Sometimes he whispered names. One night he said, "She's crying. She's begging. It won't be long now." I wanted to scream, to cut the feed. Instead I said, "Sounds like it's raining where you are." He laughed softly. "No, Knox, that's not rain." I felt sick. After every call, I wrote down everything. I started passing my notes anonymously to a detective friend. I couldn't say it on air, but I hoped to God the police could trace him. Finally, after months of this, I decided to bait him. "Mike," I said one night, "you always describe people so clearly. Ever think about describing me?" A long pause. Then, in a tone that made my skin crawl, "I already have." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "I know your routines. You leave the station at 5:12. You park 2 blocks over in the same spot. You carry a thermos, black with a chipped lid. You lock your car fast, but sometimes you forget to check the back seat." My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just watching strangers. He'd been watching me. I cut the line, heart pounding, locked the studio doors, didn't leave until daylight. The police finally made a move. Using my notes, they cross-checked the times of Mike's calls with crime scenes. They found a pattern. The calls were made from victims' own phones. He was killing, then dialing in to confess live. That detail never went public. Only I knew how close his words had been to the truth. They traced him at last. Caught him calling from a payphone near a victim's house. When they arrested him, he was calm, smiling. His name wasn't Mike. It was Harold Wilkes. He'd been moving city to city for years, leaving trails of bodies. The radio calls were his trophies, his way of performing. Listeners were horrified when the news broke. "You mean we were listening to a serial killer every night?" they asked. Yes, they were. The FBI thanked me for cooperation, but I don't feel heroic. My show became his stage. My silence bought him time. Sometimes I still hear his voice in my dreams. Low, steady, almost kind. "You're the only one who listens." I changed my schedule after that. No more late nights. No more lonely studios. But every time the phone rings, I feel my pulse spike. Because what if someone else calls? Someone who thinks the city is their stage. And I'm their only audience? Working nights, you get used to strange voices, lonely souls reaching out. But I learned something terrifying. Not every caller just wants company. Some want confession. Some want performance. And some want you tangled in their story so deep you can't escape. I still have the tapes of Mike's calls. I can't bring myself to listen, but I also can't throw them away. Because they're proof that horror doesn't always come with screams. Sometimes it comes with a calm, steady voice whispering into the night. People think working as a 911 dispatcher is just answering phones and sending help. It's not. You hear people on the worst nights of their lives. You hear screams, silence, last breaths. You carry those voices home. I thought I'd heard it all, until the night I started getting calls from a house that didn't exist anymore. It was a quiet Tuesday, close to 2 a.m., when the line lit up. I answer like always. 911, what's your emergency? Static hissed for a moment, then a child's voice whispered, he's in the house. My heart tightened. Sweetheart, what's your address? 1247 Maple Street, she said. Her voice shook. He's coming. I typed it into the system, but the screen flashed red. Address not valid. Repeat that, honey. 1247 Maple. Yes. Please, he's... The line cut off. I dispatched units anyway, just in case. They found nothing. Number 1247 Maple Street existed. The street ended at 1245. The houses beyond had been demolished years ago after a family was murdered there. I didn't know that yet. The next night, the phone rang again at 2:14 a.m., same line. Same static. This time it was a man, panicked. He's got a knife. Please, my wife. Sir, calm down. What's your location? 1247 Maple Street. The line cut out again. I asked my supervisor about the address. He frowned. That's impossible. The Henderson place? That family was killed 5 years ago. The house was torn down. The hairs on my arms rose. I looked it up on my break. The Hendersons, father, mother, daughter, slaughtered in their home by an unknown intruder. No forced entry, no suspects. A cold case. And yet, their voices were calling me. On the third night, the line lit up again. My palms were slick when I answered. 911, what's your emergency? This time it was a woman, voice ragged with terror. He's in the hallway. Please help us. Ma'am, stay calm. Can you tell me what he looks like? Silence. Then tall. Hoodie. Boots. Smells like smoke. The call ended. I wrote everything down. For the first time, there was a description. I pulled the call logs. To my shock, the recordings didn't save. The files existed, but when I pressed play, all I heard was static. The system showed the lines were live, but nothing but static remained. It felt like the calls weren't meant for the record, only for me. For the next week, the calls came like clockwork, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always from 1247 Maple. The daughter whispering from closet, he found daddy. The father yelling, take the back door, run. The mother sobbing, please don't hurt her. Each call was like reliving the night of the murders in pieces, fragments of horror stitched together. I realized something chilling. The family was giving me new details. The hoodie, the boots, the smell of smoke, things that hadn't been in the police file. I took my notes to Detective Alvarez, who'd worked the case years earlier. You're telling me ghosts are calling you? He scoffed. Not ghosts. Victims, I said firmly. They're giving clues. Things you missed. He rubbed his forehead. You know how crazy that sounds? I handed him the description. Tall man, boots, smelled of smoke. His eyes narrowed. There was a suspect, briefly. A drifter who worked odd jobs. Smoked constantly. But we couldn't tie him to the scene. What happened to him? Disappeared. The calls intensified. One night, the daughter whispered, he dropped something. What, sweetheart? What did he drop? A lighter. My pulse quickened. I told Alvarez. He ordered another sweep of the evidence storage from the Henderson house. Buried in a box of overlooked items was a cheap metal lighter found under the couch. They dismissed it at the time as belonging to the father. But under new analysis, prints surfaced, prints belonging to a man named David Cole. Cole had a record: burglary, arson, assault. He'd been in the area at the time of the murders, working demolition jobs. And he'd vanished right after. The Hendersons had given us his name, through me. The last call came on Sunday. Static, then the father's voice, calm this time. "He knows you know," he said. "He's watching." My throat went dry. Who's watching? But the line went dead. That night, as I walked to my car, I felt it, a presence. Someone standing just beyond the glow of the parking lot lights. A tall figure in a hoodie, boots scraping asphalt, the faint smell of smoke drifting on the breeze. I froze, keys clenched in my fist. But when I blinked, the lot was empty. 2 weeks later, the FBI picked up David Cole in another state. He'd been living under an alias, drifting job to job. In his storage unit, they found a box of trophies, jewelry, IDs, photos, including the Henderson families. He confessed under questioning. The evidence sealed it. The Henderson murders were solved. 5 years too late, but solved. I should have felt relief. And I did. But I also felt dread. Because those calls had stopped. The voices were gone. Had they moved on now that justice was served? Or had I simply stopped hearing them? Sometimes when the lines are quiet after midnight, I swear I hear faint static in my headset. My stomach knots. I wait for a voice from the past. Maybe another family, another unsolved case, waiting to be heard. Because if the dead can call, then my job will never just be about the living. Hospitals don't sleep. Even in the pharmacy, the night shift buzzes, machines humming, fridges clicking, printers spitting out orders for meds patients need right away. I like the routine. It was math and science, no emotions. Pills in, pills out. But then the prescriptions started coming. Not from living patients. It was 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was half asleep at the desk when the printer whirred. A fresh prescription rolled out. Vancomycin, 1G4Q12H. I scanned the chart number. Odd, it was flagged inactive. I pulled it up on the system. The patient, Mrs. Lydia Clark, had died 6 months earlier from sepsis. Confused, I checked with a nurse on 4B. "Why are you sending orders for Clark?" The nurse frowned. "She's not here. She's, dead." We both laughed nervously. Must have been a glitch, right? But the next night, another order printed. Different patient, different drug. That one had died last year. Within a week, the phantom orders kept coming. Always late at night, always for patients long gone. At first, I shrugged it off as system errors. But then I noticed something strange. The drugs being ordered weren't random. They were the exact medications tied to how those patients had died. Mrs. Clark? She died from a vancomycin dosing error. Too much, too fast. The phantom order matched the fatal dosage. Another order came for morphine on a patient who'd overdosed after a nurse miscalculated units. Another for potassium chloride, an injection that had stopped a heart cold after being given incorrectly. The hairs on my arms stood straight. These weren't glitches. They were confessions. I told my coworker Maria. She laughed until I showed her the stack of phantom orders. Her smile faded. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Unless," I said, "someone's trying to tell us something." "Like who?" "The patients." We both went quiet. The prescriptions grew bolder. Longer notes printed in the margins. One read, "Not the nurse's fault." Another, "Check the pump log." I looked up the case. The official report had blamed a nurse for a fatal overdose. But when I dug deeper into the pump's maintenance logs, I found multiple errors flagged weeks before. The pump had been malfunctioning. The hospital had ignored it. The dead patient hadn't been blaming the nurse. They were pointing to the truth. One night, I was alone when the printer screamed to life. Paper spilled out in a long sheet. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was a prescription for Eli Ramirez, a teenager who died of leukemia complications 2 years ago. The order was for a chemo drug. Wrong dosage, wrong frequency. At the bottom, in shaky text, it read, "Check the labs." They knew. I dug into the archived records. My blood turned cold. His labs had shown toxic levels days before the fatal dose. Someone had ignored the warnings to save money on extra testing. This wasn't just error, it was negligence. I brought the phantom orders to the pharmacy director. He barely glanced at them. "System glitch," he said. "Don't spread rumors." But the details match the deaths. "Drop it, Tate, or you'll find yourself unemployed." His tone was sharp enough to cut. I walked out shaking. I couldn't let it go. I kept every phantom order in a folder at home, cross-checked each with the hospital's internal incident reports. Every one matched. Fatal mistakes covered up as complications. The orders were exposing the truth. The patients hadn't just died. They'd been killed by negligence, errors swept under the rug, and the dead wanted it known. It happened on a stormy night. Thunder shook the windows, lights flickered. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the printer spat out a single order. I lifted it with shaking hands. It was addressed to me. Tate Morgan, lorazepam, 2 milligrams 4 stat. My chest tightened. That was my name, my dosage, my death sentence. At the bottom, a note. "Don't ignore this. Speak, or you're next." I nearly collapsed. The implication was clear. The ghosts weren't just warning me. They were demanding action. The next morning, I carried the folder of phantom orders straight to an investigative journalist I trusted. She listened, skeptical, until I showed her the stack of prescriptions, the timestamps, the matching fatal cases. Her eyes widened. If this is real, it's massive. Within weeks, the story broke. Hospital covered up fatal errors, whistleblower claims. My name wasn't printed, but the evidence spoke loudly. Audits followed. The hospital's leadership resigned under pressure. Multiple lawsuits reopened. Families learned the truth about how their loved ones had died. The phantom orders stopped. The printer was silent again. But sometimes, in the middle of a shift, I swear I hear the faint whir of paper feeding. My heart races, waiting for another message from the dead. I keep the last prescription in my wallet. My own name, typed out in black ink, like a threat or a promise. Because the truth is, I don't know if the ghosts are finished. Maybe they're waiting for the next voice brave enough to listen. People think working a hospital is all about saving lives. But behind the scenes, mistakes happen. Corners get cut. And sometimes, people die not because of their illness, but because of the people meant to save them. The dead don't forget. They don't forgive. I was just a pharmacy tech, shuffling pills and printing labels. But the ghosts chose me to carry their truth. And now, every time I hear a printer hum, I wonder whose story is next.